So, hello everyone. Can you hear me and see me okay? It's Chloe here, and this is our second live Q&A for Wild Abundance, and we're doing this through the month of April and maybe into May, just to help y'all get started with spring gardening and homesteading and land-based living, and give you some guidance and support as you may be turning toward the land and self-sufficiency a little more in this crazy time. I will say that I am not an expert. I don't consider myself an expert in anything. I'm a lifelong student, but I do have quite a bit of experience gardening and raising animals and foraging, using herbal medicine as a folk herbalist, lots of things, lots of land-based living skills. So I welcome your questions, and if I can answer them from my own experience, I will, and if not, I can probably point you in some good directions to get more guidance. I want to say also that today is the first day that we're opening registration for our online gardening school, and this is a project that mostly Natalie and I, but our whole team, Amy and Hannah and Olivia and a bunch of folks, have been working on in a pretty focused way for the last several weeks, and we're excited to open it up. So if you're interested in getting more gardening help and instruction and guidance through monthly videos as well as foundational courses and monthly Q&As like this that are longer and more in-depth and more focused on gardening specifically and your specific questions, then check it out. I put a link in the description, so go check out that page if you want to join the garden school and get garden help from us, and you're excited to start or expand a garden this year and you want some support and cheerleaders. I really wanted to make an image for the school of me and Natalie like shaking some beets or something, but it's a little early for beets. I have little pom-poms. Anyway, hey Ash Divine, glad that you're here. Let me know if you have any questions. You know about as much as I do, so great to have you. Maybe you can answer questions. We were a little late on announcing this today, so hopefully some folks will show up, and if not, I have a bunch of questions that people shared through a form, so I can just go ahead and talk about them, and then this video will be posted here on the Facebook page for a while, and then we'll also upload it onto our YouTube channel. So that's just Wild Abundance. If you just search Wild Abundance on YouTube, then you'll find that, and we'll be putting all these Q&As there as reference material. So let's see. All right. One of the questions that a lot of folks asked through the form was what things let me give a little more background. So I have a 23-acre farm homestead that I run with my partner, and we are doing our best to grow most of our own food. We're not cool. Yes, Caitlin or Cataline, I will answer your question in just a second. Yeah, we're doing our best to grow most of our own food. We're not a commercial farm. We sell and trade dairy products and mushrooms sometimes and produce sometimes, but we're more of a homestead than a farm. And we've been doing this for 7 years, and I've been gardening and farming and in this world for about 18 years. So that's my background. And one of the questions that a lot of folks posed was what we're doing differently now in response to the coronavirus pandemic and COVID-19 and all of that. So I'm just going to do a quick overview of the things that are shifting, or the places where our focus has kind of moved to, or urgency has increased as a result of what's going on right now. So honestly, not a whole bunch has changed. We've been moving in this direction for quite a while. And so it's just, been a sense of, I've been feeling a lot of gratitude for being as set up as we are and having been practicing these skills and developing our place for as long as we have, because in a time like this, it's just so comforting and such a blessing to have systems set up and to be, as deep into it as we are. And I know that there's a huge spectrum of where other folks are at, and I'm just feeling a lot of gratitude for that. One of the big things that has been a missing link for us is feeding our animals totally on the farm. So every year we buy hay to feed our ruminants over the winter. And I don't know, window just popped up. And that is dependent on other people. It's dependent on their haymaking prowess. The weather here in Western North Carolina can be really wet all summer, so making good quality hay is tough. More and more people are going to GMO alfalfa hay because they get a lot more for that, but the trait that is genetically modified into alfalfa is Roundup readiness. So that means that all GMO alfalfa is also heavily sprayed with Roundup, and that's not something that we want to feed to our animals. So long story short, Kalen is the main haymaker, and he's been buying hay equipment little by little as we can save up money. And we have a trade agreement with a friend who has a big hay field. We have 23 acres, but most of it is a mountainside. So we don't have space to make our own hay here for our cow and 3 goats. So yeah, moving into that feels really important and really good. Also shifting, we've always grown medicinal herbs, but kind of shifting into that, and we are planting some of the antiviral herbs that have been specifically recommended by various herbalists in terms of coronaviruses in general. So this is a novel coronavirus that we're dealing with now, but SARS and MERS and a lot of the common cold viruses are all coronavirus type of viruses. And so antiviral herbs we've been planting and just putting a lot more focus in those. And also I would say the third big thing is seed saving, which is something that we've been doing like a little more each year, developing land races and varieties that are especially adapted to our place here. So saving our own seeds from plants that do really well in our conditions. And each year we kind of take on a couple more crops that we're going to do that with. And this year we're feeling really motivated to do that more because that's another thing that we depend on other folks from. And I also have felt very heartened in my communications directly and just through their websites with the seed companies that we do buy from, that they're doubling down their commitment to providing good quality seeds to food growers all around the country. So that's heartening. And then the final thing that I'm going to mention is just having a good water system in place. So we're dependent, we have creeks on our land, and so we could haul water by hand to water our crops, but we're pretty dependent on a well pump, which is powered by electricity. And so trying to shift to a gravity fed system is something that's on our mind, although it's pretty expensive. So now I'm going to respond to you, Caitlin. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. What would I recommend? Her question is, I assume that you're her, I don't know. So this person's question is, what would you recommend for someone who's just starting out? Easiest veggies and fruits to grow. So if you can say what climate you're in, that would be helpful, but some easy vegetables to grow. Some of the easiest vegetables to grow in most places are green beans are usually pretty easy for most people. They don't need super rich soil because they have a symbiotic relationship with beneficial bacteria that live in their roots that fix nitrogen. So that's all kind of a complex way of saying they can bring their own fertility to the soil through that relationship. So even if you don't have super rich soil, or you don't have access to compost or manure amendments like that, then you can often still grow beans and have a pretty good harvest because they fix nitrogen. Another one that tends to be easy for folks is zucchini and summer squash. And that's another one that's just super. Beans and zucchini are both tend to be easy. They definitely have certain pests, and I can talk about that a little bit more in a second, but they tend to be easy and they tend to be very high yielding. So it's very rewarding if you're just starting out to plant 1 or 2 zucchini plants, and you'll get a lot of zucchini. You might get more zucchini than you even want to eat. And same with beans. If you plant maybe like, a 3-foot double row or something, not a huge amount of beans, you'll get a lot of green beans. And the variety of green bean that I would recommend for a beginner, and that one that I grow every year, is called Provider. And it's just super quick and abundantly yielding and tastes great and tends to be pretty robust and resilient. So just get your hands on some Provider bean seeds. And in terms of zucchini, I really like the Costata romanesca, but that one is a longer season. So trying out something like just a saffron is a yellow squash that I like. Black zucchini is a great zucchini. There's lots of different kinds of zucchinis, but those would be great. Tomatoes also. Tomatoes are very rewarding if you like those. I love them. All of these veggies can have issues and pests, but they tend to get in a crop, at least a crop or two, like a harvest or two before those pests come in. So here in the Southeast, we have a Mexican bean beetle is really present, and for us decimates our bean crops by mid to late summer. If you're just starting out and you're just growing beans for the first time, the chances are, unless like your neighbors have been growing beans for a long time, that they won't be so bad the first year with the Mexican bean beetle. But getting a crop in early is really helpful for beans and the Mexican bean beetles. And if you live in an urban or suburban kind of setting, then they tend to be a lot less. And with zucchinis, you just want to make sure that you don't water them too much when it's really sunny, because that can burn the leaves, and also that you don't water them in the evening where the leaves can stay moist, because that can lead to some fungal issues. And then fruits that are easy. Strawberries tend to be they're very rewarding because you'll get a yield the first year. If you can put in perennials, raspberries are also pretty rewarding and relatively easy as fruits go. That's really going to depend on your climate. Mulberries would be another fruit that I would say is a great beginner one, and super high yielding and fast growing, and tend to not have a lot of pests and problems here in the Southeast. So any other questions? Anybody have any other questions? Last time we had 25 people. It doesn't even tell me how many people are on here. Let me just check. All right. Well, I'm going to just look at the questions that folks have already shared. Should I be transplanting my seedlings to a bigger pot once they sprout, specifically my squash seeds? Thank you. I don't know the size of your initial pot, so I can't say for sure. But if you're growing squash in a pot, you definitely want to grow the seedlings out in a 4-inch pot. So that's like, can you see me? That's like a little pot like this. It's not one of those cell trays or a 6-pack. And so squash, and it depends on if you're talking about zucchini or winter squash. There's a pretty big difference there. Winter squash have really deep roots, and when they sprout, that root, that radical that comes out, that first root that comes out of the seed, wants to go straight to the center of the earth. It wants to go down and anchor that plant and begin searching for nutrients and water. And so what I do with winter squash, so like pumpkins and butternuts and things like that, is I direct sow them in the garden. I don't even start them in pots. But you have to have an area prepared, and you have to have a climate where you have a long enough growing season to do that. With zucchinis, sometimes I start a few in pots just to have a head start on the season, and then I direct sow another round later. You definitely, if you started them out in a little tiny pot in a 6-pack or a cell tray, then you do want to transplant them on. But the thing with that, I mean, if you already have them and that's what you need to do, that's fine. But in the future with squash, if you're going to start them in pots, you want to start them in a big pot so you don't have to transplant them, because those big roots are actually kind of delicate, and so they don't like being transplanted very much. So the minimum transplanting for squash plants, the better. Direct seeding is ideal for the health of the root system, but transplanting is fine. Most commercial farms transplant them, but not a lot of transplanting. So with certain things, it's more practical and easier to sprout the seeds in a much tighter distance, so you can have bottom heat, and you can have, you can be tending a smaller area, a smaller tray or flat or whatever, when they need that intensive care of heat and moisture all day, every day. So things like tomatoes, a lot of people do that with tomatoes. I do that with tomatoes. I start them in a cell tray, and then I just actually did this yesterday, transplant them onto about a 4-inch pot as they get bigger. And they're fine with that, and a lot of things are fine with that. Peppers are fine with that, eggplants, other things. But the cucurbits, so squash as well as cucumbers, winter squash and summer squash as well as cucumbers, I tend to their root systems are a little more fragile. So I like to start them out where they're going to be, or in just have one pot and then transplant into the ground. Let's see. Okay, let's see. Caitlin, give a little more. Thank you. We just rented a cabin with 13 acres and a small barn. Landlord said she would allow animals. We drink a lot of milk. Do you think it would be odd to bring a cow onto a rented property, or should we get some goats? I don't think it would be any more odd to bring a cow onto a rented property than goats. There's pluses and minuses. I have both, so I can speak to both. Cows are a lot easier to fence. So fencing is going to be an issue no matter what kind of animal you want to get for milk. And cows can be fenced with single strand electrified wire. So just one hot wire going around the area, and that can hold in cows. And that is definitely not going to hold in goats. So goats do a lot of climbing and jumping, and cows don't do that. You would think that a cow could escape more easily than a goat because it's a bigger, stronger animal, but cows don't really jump and climb in the same way, unless you have like a cow in heat or a bull or something. I mean, they can do it, but they're not apt to do it. Goats do a lot of climbing and jumping, so you need very sturdy fencing. Some people use electric fence for goats, and that's in some ways the easiest and cheapest route, depending on, if you have a source for electrifying the wires and if you have some familiarity with setting up that kind of fencing. What we use are welded wire cattle panels. So they're really burly, reusable steel panels, and we attach them to T-posts, and they're, I think, 4 feet tall. And that they've worked great for us, but we're not renting at this point. And so they're something that we can reuse over and over again. They're heavy, they're not so cheap, they're cumbersome to move around, but they work really well for goats. So with a cow, another thing that's a difference between cows and goats is cows can actually be more sedentary. Cows don't need as much space to run around and move. And a goat in a small area will be unhappy and unhealthy. So a lot of people think because goats are smaller animals that you can, if you only have a small amount of space, then you can have a couple goats, which in some ways is true, but goats need a variety of terrain. They need things to jump on and play on. They just get really bored. They're very energetic. Whereas a cow, doesn't do a whole lot of jumping and climbing, like I said. And so a cow can be, in terms of their physical fitness, they don't have to move around as much on the day-to-day. When it comes to providing food for cows versus goats, obviously one cow versus one goat is going to eat a lot more grass. And cows have a preference for grass over browse being like the leaves of woody perennials, even trees. Although my cow loves multiflora rose and she'll eat poplar leaves. Was half raised on goat milk and is with a herd of goats, so she kind of behaves like a goat. But I think cows are apt to eat those woody perennial leaves and bark and things as well. But goats really need that diversity. So depending on if the cabin that you rented has a big pasture or has some woods or some shrubby land, that could help your decision as well. Another thing to consider is goats really don't do well alone. So no herd animal does that well alone, but cows seem to tolerate it a little bit better. With goats, you're going to need at least 2 goats. And with a cow, it would be ideal to give her a companion animal. So if you don't get 2 cows, then get a cow and maybe a wether goat, which is a castrated male goat, or some other kind of companion animal for her, because they, like us humans, they're biologically adapted for group living and for co-regulation with the group. So I've known goats that are kept alone and they act kind of crazy and neurotic. And it's kind of like a lot of people are acting right now, stuck in their houses by themselves. It's like not how we evolved to experience life. So that's another consideration. And then another thing with cows versus goats is with a cow, depending on the cow, some cows you can just tie them to a stake or a post or something to milk them. Whereas a goat, you're going to need a milk stand. So something that locks their head in. We have both. We have a locking head kind of stanchion for both the cow and the goats. And it's easier with a cow to have that kind of situation and a flat surface. But I definitely have known people who just tie their cow to a tree and sit down, bring their little stool and sit down. The bucket is on the grass and they can milk their cow like that. My cow's a little ornery, so that hasn't worked for us, and we have the stanchion. But that's something to consider with cows versus goat. And then the final thing that I'm going to mention, and I'll see if you have any other specific questions, is that the butter fat in cow milk rises to the top. So that's like if you leave, if you ever have bought raw unhomogenized cow milk, there's a layer of cream on the top. And with goat milk, if you let it sit in the fridge, a little bit of cream will separate out to the top, but the fat globules are smaller and more naturally homogenized. So if you're going to want to make things like butter, then cow milk is a lot easier to do that with. With goat milk, you need to get this mechanical device called a cream separator, which if you just have one or two goats is not going to be super practical. They're pretty expensive. So, and then of course your preference in taste. And if you want to make chev, which is delicious goat cheese that you can't really make with cow milk, you can make a similar thing, but it doesn't taste the same. So those are some comparisons. And then just your preference in terms of if you have an affinity for kind of bovine energy versus caprine energy, which is pretty different. So that's what I have to say about cows versus goats. I'm seeing Ash asking, how can you keep the beetles off the beans? Good freaking question, Ash. I have tried a lot of things and none of them have worked. This is our strategy now. So I actually was just before this call out setting up some hoops to cover beans that I sowed a week and a half ago, which is extremely early for growing beans in this region. They already got a little bit of a nip of the last frost, and I'm going to cover them up for this cold weather coming. But we look for varieties of beans. Usually they're from England and from cooler, wetter places that will germinate in cooler, wetter soil, so we can get them in the ground really early. Because the bean beetles, their population spikes like in late July. And so if we can get the bean plants to grow and have that vigor, and maybe even if it's snap beans, we'll already get a harvest before the bean beetles really hit their peak, then that has helped. And when they do come, I go every day and I pick off the beetles and the larvae. So I just squish them literally. And those are the things that we've done. And then rotating, because what I've observed is people who haven't grown beans in an area, the first year that they grow them, the beetles tend to be less of an issue. And so rotating, we took a whole year. Did we take a whole year off growing beans? No, we just grew not very many. We just grew snap beans one year. And then another thing that we do in terms of beans. So when we're talking about beans, we're talking about the common bean, which is Phaseolus vulgaris as the genus and species. And that's like snap beans, like those providers I mentioned, pinto beans, black beans, the common beans that we kind of refer to as beans. But there are a lot of other kinds of beans in different genuses. I can't remember the plural of that word, and species. So cowpeas, which are black-eyed peas and other beans in that family, don't seem to be susceptible to the bean beetles. Don't seem to like eating them. They're a whole different genus and species. I forget the genus and species. I'm going to look it up. But so we have shifted over to growing a lot of them. So for our dry beans, we grow just as many cowpeas or black-eyed peas. They're not all black-eyed. There's lots of different colors and lots of different sizes. They're really fun to explore. And so the bean beetles are not a problem with those. And that's a way around it where we just don't even deal with the bean beetles. Okay, Vigna unguiculata. That's why I didn't remember. It's kind of quite a cool Vigna unguiculata. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. So cow beans are good for dry beans, but they're also, people call them, when you eat them in the green bean or snap bean stage, asparagus beans or yard long beans. They're traditionally used in Thai cooking, in different African cooking from different African countries. They're tasty too. They have a different flavor, but so you can grow snap beans and dry beans of the Vigna unguiculata, the cow bean genus and species, and just avoid the bean beetle issue entirely. And I'm not sure in this region, lentils and garbanzos don't do so well, but if you're in a drier, hotter region, then you could try lentils and garbanzos, and I'm not sure if they would be susceptible to the bean beetles or not. Tepary beans are another ones that I want to try. So there's lots of kinds of beans. There's not just the common bean, and the bean beetles tend to like that common bean a lot more than other kinds. So that's my approach. Okay. Do you use the Farmers Almanac for planting times at all? You know, I have referenced it, but to be totally honest with you, I plant things when I can, when I can. You know, here in the mountains of Western North Carolina in the spring, the weather can be really erratic. It's getting more erratic as climate change just shakes everything up on our planet. It's very wet here in the spring. We have a lot going on our farm. I have a 3-year-old now. So I kind of touch into those rhythms, and I think they're very useful and powerful, like the phases of the moon and those sorts of cycles. I think they absolutely have a big impact on plants. But the reality of my life is that I just do things when I can do them within, you know, I mean, I wouldn't have planted beans in March. It was on the edge when I planted beans at the beginning of April. But last year I planted them much earlier than I ever had, and they did great because we're just having warmer weather. So that's another thing that the Farmer's Almanac, I'm not sure how adaptive it is becoming in response to climate change. So no, I personally don't, but I think that it's a valuable resource would be my answer to that. Ash is saying, I know you said start early, but what if you get beetles? How do you get ready for them? I always get beetles, Ash. They always come. I just make time to go and squish them, honestly. We haven't gotten into a ton of sprays here just because it's kind of, we are trying to have a more ecological approach, like looking at the whole system, and also because it's so wet here that oftentimes you can spray and then the next day the spray is washed off. So I feel like we did do some neem oil spraying one year, but they just, once they get going, they're just really hard to control. And the little yellow larval stage that look like these little yellow fuzzy kind of blobs are often on the underside of the leaves. And so if you're dealing with pole beans, then you could spray up underneath the leaves. But if you have bush beans, which have that lower growing, let's see if I'm in the camera, that lower growing habit, then getting anything to spray up under those leaves is pretty difficult. You have to like be crawling along on the ground with your sprayer, and that's just not something that we've done. Maybe we have, but we don't anymore because it was such a pain in the butt and it didn't work. I can't remember if I think we did try that at one point, and then we're like, this is crazy. I mean, how do you get rid of them? Well, I think they're just here to stay. I think, you know, we live on a farm that was most recently farmed. The previous people who actually farmed here farmed about 20 years ago, and they were a family of 11 who homesteaded here, grew tobacco as a cash crop, like old time mountain, white mountain family. And we got to know some of the kids. One of them became our friend. He turned 80 a couple years ago, and he actually passed away last year. And we talked to him about pesticides, and we were trying to get a sense of if there maybe was any residual chemical residue in the soil. And he said, no, we didn't spray. And then we talked about it because he was still farming at that point down the road from us. And he said, yeah, the pests are so much worse now that you can't not spray. And obviously I don't share that opinion. Like, I think that there's other ways to approach it, but just hearing that from an old timer was really eye-opening. Like, it's not just that I don't know what I'm doing. It's that the shifts in the global climate and global trade and just the introduction of a lot of non-native pests that are coming from other places where they might have natural predators in those places has shifted the landscape of farming. And so I don't think it's realistic to expect to get rid of the bean beetles. I think, yeah, as I shared, my approach is more like adaptive, you know? So like, how can I still have beans to eat knowing that the bean beetles are part of the reality here? And then with the rotation and stuff, and also they overwinter in mulch, and we do a lot of mulching. So things like taking the mulch off and having a couple of days or weeks of freezing weather once you've removed the mulch could have a beneficial impact. That's not something I've done a ton of experimentation with because we've just leaned on the early planting and the cowpeas. Hi, Nora. Oh, that's so cool that you're here. Hello. Good to see you. Hope you're well. Mini cows could be a good option. Yeah, I have never dealt with mini cows. Something that would be I would want to look into with mini cows is the size of their udder and teats. So assuming that you're milking by hand, I remember when our cow first freshened, so that's when she first came into milk after having her first calf. Her young teats were very small and were hard to get my hands on to milk, and her young fresh udder was very, very tight. And so she was difficult to milk at first. And I can imagine that a similar situation, a young, fresh mini cow might be even more difficult to milk. So maybe not. Maybe they have been bred to have small bodies, but their teat size is not proportionately smaller in the same way that their body is. That's definitely something to look into, though. So, and if you don't have experience milking, if this is like your first time milking an animal, then the learning curve, it depends on, everybody kind of has a different feel for it, but there's a learning curve there. And so getting an animal that has an udder that's easier to milk would be a good move for a beginning milker, I would say. Even for an experienced milker, it just makes life easier. Question about program. I live in Colorado. Okay, so she's asking about the online gardening program, which is really awesome and exciting. You live in Colorado, and you wonder if the program would apply since we live in a very different environment. That is true. It's very different here than in Colorado. So my answer to that is we are creating this with people in all different environments in mind. So obviously our examples and the videos that we're filming are going to be here in Southern Appalachia, Western North Carolina. But I grew up in Northern California. Natalie grew up in Washington. I've done some gardening in New Mexico and in the tropics, and Natalie's gardened in Spain and Guatemala. Like we have some experience, we have awareness of how different the world can be. And depending on where you are with your skill level, most of what we're teaching will be totally applicable. So there'll probably be different varieties that are going to do really well in your area. And we're pulling together as many resources as we can for like local seed companies and local planting guides in terms of dates to plant and things like that, because that's not something that we can just know off the top of our heads and teach. But when it comes to like, caring for a seedling and transplanting and mulching and weeding and building compost and building soil, all of those things are pretty universal. So there's nuance and there's definitely differences from region to region, but I think a lot of the foundations, if not all of the foundations of what we're teaching, will be applicable. And it just may be that after you get a good foundation and get going gardening, that you'll want to dive deeper with some local teachers and some local folks. So that's my response to that. We are aware that we're in our little bioregion here, and there are so many different regions and so many different factors. And to be honest, some things that grow here on my farm don't do well down at Natalie's place at the Wild Abundance campus. And that's 4 miles away. So part of what we're going to teach in the online gardening school is how to connect with your place and what things to look for to understand where you're at and to understand how plants are going to respond to the conditions in your garden. Because like I said, 4 miles different in the same state, same region, there are differences. And so it's not just about do this, do this, do this. It's about having a dialogue with the natural systems. And then, of course, like I said, the locally adapted varieties are going to make a big difference. Row cover. Ash, you really don't want those bean beetles. I don't either. I don't know. I haven't tried row cover. I don't do a lot of row covering just because it's a pain in the butt because it gets really windy on our farm. And it's just a pain in the butt. But you could totally try. I know that people have a lot of success with row cover and flea beetles, which can decimate eggplants and Chinese cabbage and mustards. So maybe they could do something for the bean beetles too. Although my question with that has always been like, if they overwinter in the mulch, then we're trapping them inside with the plants because they're coming up through the mulch. So that would be something to experiment with for sure. Do you only eat cowpeas dry? No. So there's some variety, just like with Phaseolus vulgaris, the common bean, there's some varieties that are specifically for dry eating, like black-eyed peas. So you let the plants mature all the way, and then you harvest them, and you shell out the beans, and then you boil the beans and cook them like a pot of beans with a ham hock and some garlic and whatever you want to do. I just made some the other day with a ham hock. They're really good. Some celery, some fresh sage, thyme. But the beans that are called yard-long beans or asparagus beans are that same genus and species, but they're varieties that have been bred for fresh eating, so for green bean eating. And the flavor is different. These are not green snap beans that you eat raw like you would with Phaseolus vulgaris or common bean snap beans. They're better steamed or sauteed, but they're super robust. I mean, just so many. You can harvest so many off of just a few plants. And what I do is I actually cut them up and blanch them and freeze them and put them in soups all throughout the winter. And so it's nice to have that just added sort of fresh vegetable in soups all throughout the winter. And I love cooking them up with a little bit of toasted sesame oil and garlic and either umeboshi plum vinegar or some tamari. And they just, they're good like that. But they do have a different flavor. So check them out. And they're not a replacement for snap beans, green snap beans of Phaseolus vulgaris or common beans. They're just something else that's also wonderful. And the bean beetles don't like them. So beetles don't seem to like edamame. Oh, great. Yeah, I've been wanting to grow edamame and soybeans here for a long time, and I just haven't gotten around to it. There's a lot of things that I want to try, so that's cool. So edamame is another option, and soybeans are great for making miso and tempeh and tofu, and just also eating as edamame. Ash is apologizing for being redundant because the comments have a big lag time. That's cool. No problem, Ash. It's probably good to be redundant because that's how we learn. What about if you live in opposite seasons? You're in New Zealand. Yes. So I assume that you're referring to the garden school. So we're going to be going along with our Northern Hemisphere seasons. But the program will go all year. So you could join and just kind of save up the lessons. The foundations will be good to learn at any time, although you're not going to be doing any spring gardening right now because it's the fall where you are. But I think that it would still be very useful, but there would be a lag time. So you'd have to wait and then watch them in opposite order, or not opposite order, but opposite order. So, when we get to fall, it'll be your spring and you can start watching the spring videos. So the question and answer will be less applicable to you, unfortunately. And I'm sorry about that. And I love New Zealand so much. That was the first place that I traveled in my many years of international travel, and the first place that I woofed when I was 17 years old. And I picked apples in Nelson and helped to herd sheep up in, what is that? On the North Island, on the coast. I can't remember the name of the town. Anyway, it's a long time ago. But New Zealand is such a beautiful place and such a wonderful place for agriculture. It's really, I'm sure, as you know, it's many parts of New Zealand are easy places to grow gardens. So I hope that it could work for you to join us, but unfortunately we will be off on a different rhythm. Are cows expensive to care for? Asked Caitlin. Well, yes, they are. It depends on if you want to manage them organically. So that is a big cost difference. And it depends if you want to be totally grass-based or if you want to feed grain. So I'm assuming that you're in a temperate place. So that means you have winter. And unless you have, you're renting a cabin, I think you said on 13 acres. And unless, did you say 13 acres? Let's see. Yeah, 13 acres. So 13 acres could be, if you have a lot of pasture, that could be plenty to rotate your cow and feed her on pasture for the growing time, but you're going to need to supplement with hay in the winter. And then for milk cows, what we do is we feed dehydrated alfalfa, organic alfalfa pellets during milking time as a supplement to her grass and grass hay. And those are pretty expensive. They're like a 40-pound bag is like, we buy them in bulk, but I think they're like $35 or $40. And we give her about a half gallon of that a day. So it lasts like a month, or more. We also feed some to the goats, so it's a little hard to say. But yeah, but a cow, the thing with a cow, so yeah, you're going to need to feed the cow. And then fencing is going to be a thing. And then you need to buy a milk pail for milking, and jars for keeping the milk in, and something to strain the milk through. And you can find all of that online. A great book that I would recommend if you're interested in keeping a family cow is a book called Keeping a Family Cow by Joanne Grolman, I believe is her name. That has been my go-to book, and it's really set up for a small scale, natural, grass-based dairy farmer. So Keeping a Family Cow is a book that you could check out. So yeah, it really depends on if you want to sell milk or milk products also. So our cow, when she first freshens, so right after she calves, when we first start milking, makes about 4 gallons of milk a day, every day. And so that's another thing that I totally should have mentioned in the comparison between goats and cows. So a goat, a purebred dairy breed of goat, can make up to about 1 gallon of milk a day when they first freshen. And my goats typically make about 1/2 gallon, sometimes a little bit more, but we have kind of not purebred dairy goats. And we also feed them a totally grass-based diet, so we don't give them any grain either. Grain will increase milk production, but by some measures decrease the quality. So yeah, you're going to have to deal with 4 gallons of milk a day-ish, depending on the cow. Could be more, but at least 2 when she first freshens. And so that's something to consider with your milking. Like, are you going to make a ton of cheese and age it? Do you have a place to age the cheese? Do you have a place to store that milk? We have an extra fridge on our back porch where we store milk and yogurt that I make that we sell to a little cooperative dairy share membership of friends and neighbors. So that's definitely something to consider. And that can offset the cost of keeping the cow for sure. And a goat is just a little more manageable because it's a smaller amount of milk, and you can still sell some, and you're still going to need fridge space for sure, because even 1/2 gallon a day of milk is a lot of milk. Learning how to make cheese. Another book I would recommend is The Art of Natural Cheese Making by David Asher, and published by Chelsea Green, I believe. And yeah, so learning how to make cheese and what to do with the milk is a really awesome and important thing to do if you're going to get a dairy animal. Okay, cows expensive. They grow quickly and you get a lot from just a few plants. I'm in the central Piedmont area. I assume that you're talking about cowpeas, Stephanie. Correct me if you're wrong. But yes, they do grow quickly and you get a lot from just a few plants. It's really wonderful. And they grow in a lot of different areas too. All right. Well, it's about that time to go feed my family dinner. I think we're going to eat some cowpeas for dinner or maybe some squash soup. If anybody else has any other questions, please pose them now. I'll give a couple minutes wait time. Okay, Caitlin asks, I would love to sell extra raw milk. I think we have a need in the area. Thank you for everything. Yes, you're welcome. Good luck, Caitlin. And feel free to pop back in. We'll be doing this every Tuesday for the next several weeks. And we're actually working on an online course in our online self-sufficiency school. So we're just putting together these topic specific courses to be available during this time when so much craziness is going on and folks, it's not as easy to come and do in-person courses. So I am hoping to put one together on keeping animals and specifically keeping dairy animals. So just check back here for when. That won't be for another couple of months if that's ready. But yeah, check back here if you're interested in that. You'll get to watch me milk and see our barn set up and, just kind of go deeper than what I said today and a lot of things that I did say today and more. So post a link to the online course in the comments. Yeah, that's a great idea. So the online course for animals is not ready yet, but I'm going to just post a link, and I posted this in the description, but I'm going to post a link to our online gardening school in the comments right here. And then also the sort of landing page for, where is it? For all of our online classes that are shorter and topic driven. And there's nothing on there yet, but you can get on the wait list there. So that's great. So when we release those, then you'll know. I'm going to post that too. Right. Oh, good. Oh, it makes a little picture and everything. I'm kind of new to this. Okay. Relevant issue. How do we find a cow? Yes, I will answer that, and then I'm going to sign off. You're welcome, Stephanie. Thank you for being here. Okay. So how do you find a cow? Craigslist is a good place to look. If you have, what is it called? An agricultural extension office in your area. So most counties have them. You can check there. And they kind of keep tabs on most of the local farmers in the area in a lot of rural regions. And so can connect you with somebody who might have a cow. If there's anybody selling raw milk in your area, or if there's raw milk available at like a food co-op or a health food store in your area, you could inquire about the source of that raw milk. The thing with keeping dairy animals is to keep an animal in milk, you have to breed that animal and they have to continue having babies. And so as a person keeping dairy animals, your herd is constantly growing. And most people, everybody hits a point where they don't need to keep any more of those animals. And so they're going to want to sell them. So following the milk to the cow is a good way. And then Craigslist, I mean, I see just looking up, like right now, I'm going to look up Asheville Craigslist, and I bet there will be milk cows. The breeds that, so we have a Jersey cow. Milk, I'm just going to do milk or dairy cow. I'm going to say Jersey cow. So we have a Jersey cow, and Jerseys are great because they make milk that has a higher milk solids content, higher percentage of milk solids than Holsteins. So Holsteins are the black and white spotted cows that are kind of the mainstay of the commercial dairy industry. And they make basically waterier milk than Jerseys. Jerseys make more creamy, higher protein, richer milk. And that's the same with Guernseys, are more like Jerseys. There's a bunch of them. She lays it out, Joanne Grollman lays it out in that Keeping a Family Cow book. And there's actually an online forum associated with that book. So if you just look up Keeping a Family Cow, then you'll find a ton of information. But Jerseys and Guernseys, Dexters, some people keep Dexters as milk cows, and they're smaller. They tend to be a little more ornery, I think. But you probably, as just one family, don't want to get a Holstein. Some folks get Jersey Holstein crosses. Knowing kind of what breeds you're open to is a good place to start, and then looking for that. But I just looked on Craigslist, and I'm seeing 2 heifers nearby. So a heifer is a young female cow who hasn't yet had a baby. Here's a Jersey cow-calf pair for $1,000, which is, about how it goes. That's actually pretty affordable for a cow-calf pair because you're getting the mama and the calf. Jersey cow and 2 calves for $2,000. Wow. 2 calves. Cows usually just have 1, so I wonder what that's about. A 3-year-old Jersey cow for sale for $900. Yeah, so Craigslist will probably give you something, and the management may or may not be something that you align with. Whereas if you follow the path of raw milk to the folks who are producing that, it's likely that they're going to be more in line. Just people who take the risk of selling raw milk and value offering raw milk to the community tend to be also oriented towards grass-based, pasture-based management, organic management, not on the whole, but generally that seems to be the case. All right. Yeah. Craigslist. Totally. Easy peasy. Facebook too, I bet. I don't use Facebook so much for buying and selling, but my partner really does. And there's a lot of land-based, like he sells plant starts and young trees and things like that. Kaylin Campbell, if you're interested in local nursery stock. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. And I'll see you next Tuesday. And I hope to see some of you at our online gardening school. Bye.